say that, I am Gish Jen, and it's just such an honor to be on this panel. I have to say that, Kim, you did a brilliant job putting this panel together. I mean, it is kind of unbelievable how related we all are, and it's unbelievable what a trajectory we've managed to make quite, accidentally. I think that listening, let me just put something out right away, which is that, I wonder if you've considered the possibility, not that those people were traumatized, of course they were traumatized, but that their narrative is not a matter only of trauma, but actually of a different self. Right. And that even had they not had that trauma, they still would have narrated in this way. And that it is even more pronounced because of their trauma, but that they would have narrated anyway. I say that because, for instance, we look at somebody, so let me back up and sort of say that I am fascinated by narrative. I myself am a daughter of immigrants, a lot of trauma in my background as well. So I've been fascinated all along by what Western narrative is. I did become a novelist. And yet I have to say it was always like a foreign language, even though I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, I was born here, I only speak English, but it was still a foreign language. And there's a way in which it wasn't until my most recent book, Tiger Writing, Art, Culture, and the Interdependent Self, that I began to understand why that language was so foreign. But let's go back and sort of look at just how the Western novel is. I think that starting with what Ed was sort of saying, that we have the lyric, but then we have this unauthorized testimony. We have the epic, but then we have the novel. The same thing is happening in all those things, which we're going from a collective story to an individual story, and by the way, an individual story which is subversive, right? Because that's one thing about it. It's not just that it is an individual, but as an individual talking back and pushing back in a big way, and that is very foundational to who we are. So the novel, the unauthorized testimony, the novel, and the self, the Western individualistic self, all came up together. And if you can think of them as kind of entwined, this is what's going on. They feed on each other. We need the novel is helping us invent the self, and the self is helping us invent the novel. And now, in the beginning, it was quite a subversive thing to have an individual talking back to this narrative. But then now, in our present situation in America, where the novel is so established and individualism is so established, now, lo and behold, a lot of people, I think, are feeling in their heart of hearts that this narrative, the narrative that you've just described so well, and that you were talking about also, is not actually us. That unitary novel, that unitary narrative. A lot of people are asking, well, wait a minute, who gets to tell that story? And wait a minute, that's not actually how I even experience myself, I will say that some people do experience themselves that way. They're very individualistic, but a lot of people, especially a lot of minorities, especially a lot of women, a lot of people feel like, well, wait a minute, I actually never felt that I was in the middle of my own narrative, and that was the most important thing. When I'm talking to students about this, I like to sort of, talk about the self as being like an avocado, where, this self has a big avocado pit, and the most important thing is the expression of this avocado pit. All of our Western values have to do with this avocado pit, which I will say is kind of an interjected divinity, right? An interjected God. So it's sacred. So that means that things like its expression, like freedom of speech, is a sacred thing in the West, because it has to do with the expression of our sacred avocado pit, but now our subversive, our subversion, before the subversion was the individual against the epic, and now our subversion is the multivocal against individualism, right? So it's against the individualism of the novel. And this is where we go, we were talking about arts and democracy. There is something about this which is, of course, is deeply democratic, because what we're really saying is, wait a minute, this space has been constructed, but actually the way it was constructed, the foundations, the very foundations of that space are not my foundations. In fact, that space was constructed in such a way that I could never really be at home in it, right? And so now we have all these people, and it's multi. You're doing it, I'm doing it, and Adam is doing it. But let me just go one step further and sort of say, well, but why is it that univocal narrative feels so very foreign? So why is it that I mastered it? I wrote it. I won prizes doing it. But why is it that it always felt like a foreign language? And the answer is actually there is another self, the interdependent self, which is very, very, very much buried because the West is so dominant. It's so dominant that we imagine that the individualistic self is natural, and then if it's not on that model, it must be because of trauma. Like that's the only explanation. But that's not actually the only explanation. Actually, the explanation is much, much deeper, and that it's a cultural thing. So, like I say, you will, if you look at the Chinese, you can look at many, many, many cultures. They also don't have a strong narrative tradition as we know it. They don't. And Virginia Pye is here; she knows what I'm talking about. I know. I see a lot of people nodding. That tradition is not there, and it really goes back to a completely different self. And I will say, a self that unfortunately, because when we talk about this other self, it so quickly becomes the self which is being suppressed by authoritarianism, right? But actually, without the authoritarianism, you also have this self which is just much smaller. And which is not, and is still individual, I will say. It's just not individualistic. So you do, it's not that these individuals are all kind of like they're robots or clones or, or sheep or anything like that. It's simply that that's not what, their individuality is not the most important thing to them. So if you ask your average Chinese, like, are people different? Of course people are different. They don't think that the people are not different, But if you ask them, well, is that the most important thing? That you understand that difference? That you act, that you use that difference to make a difference in the world, to change your environment, to write your narrative, to be the star of your own movie? The answer is, that's not what they care about. They have it, but it's not, it's not on the throne of their life, if you will. They have it. It's not that they don't have it. They're not sheep. They just don't care about it the way we care about it in the West. And therefore they don't tell these stories this way. Do you know what I mean? It's not even that they can't, the answer is it's not even that they don't tell the story that way. They don't lay the memories down to begin with that way. Like they don't have, I shouldn't say they, because I should really say we. I'm really in between, I will say, because my parents were Chinese immigrants. So I was I was brought up by Chinese immigrant parents, but I was brought up here in actually a predominantly Jewish community, very, very verbal.
Yeah, I thought you were Jewish.
I know. Well, I am. Everybody says that, I'm like, I feel like I'm really, the only, Catholic Chinese Jew that they know.
Not really.
But really, oh, he knows more than one. Anyway, but my point, and let me just wrap this up so we can go on to our discussion part, is that you can have both selves, first of all. So, I myself have both selves, so I know. But I will also tell you that the original self, it's not that it remembers and it's repressed. It actually, and all the studies are coming out of, especially Cornell, it's not that they have that memory and they're repressing it. They never lay it down because when they're crossing the river, they're not thinking about themselves. There's a wonderful thing where Orhan Pamuk, who comes, of course, many of you may know, is a Nobel novelist who is from Turkey, which is kind of in between, it's over there, it's very much on the border of Asia, and, they don't have the strong Western self there either, and he talks about how there's actually a tense, in Turkish, where, that you can use when you're actually talking about memories that are of you, but that are the memories of others. So that
that tense.
Wow.
Yeah. But it just goes to show how much part of the culture it is. And it's so interesting because it actually, in his case, it's been this extraordinary gift because there is a way in which all of Istanbul is his story. And that he grew up feeling that, you know what I mean? This is not like a multivocal thing. He grew up with that, with all those voices, but he also grew up sort of looking at himself, as if from outside of himself and being almost unable to distinguish what were his memories from the memories of people of him, right?
Yeah.
But this goes right to your story and that guy. And the answer is a lot of people with an interdependent self are from the very beginning remembering things both from their own point of view, but also from the point of view of others. And the story that they're laying down, not this, forget about what they forget, because people do forget, everybody forgets, but the story that they're laying down to begin with is not self-focused. I'll just stop there.